Good evening, everybody. It's an amazing privilege to be chatting about this topic, finance and business. And the great thing for me in this whole week is that I can overtly talk about the biblical practice of finance and business in this chat. So it's a real blessing for me. The Bible is probably the most practical document on finance that I've ever read, and I've read many. So I want to share just a biblical perspective on this, how to manage our finances and our businesses in the context of this crisis that we are in. So the first point that I want to make is just in the context in which we are working with finance and business. So very, very quickly, our context obviously is South Africa, and many of the economists have written about this 3 stops that South Africa is experiencing. Now, the first stop that the South African economy is experiencing, and we that work in that economy need to understand this, because we need to understand the severity of what's going on around us so that we can react in a biblical manner. The first stop is the fact that the international partners like the US and the UK and Europe and China and India, all our trading partners, are really, really struggling. So the first stop is that the international markets have stopped. So our partners to which we export are really struggling. The World Bank in this past week indicated a forecast for 2020 contraction of the economy. So in other words, a negative growth of the world economy of minus 5.2%, which we haven't seen in absolute decades. And just to give you a sense of the powerhouse in the world is the US. And the powerhouse in the world from 2010 to 2020 were able to put 22 million additional jobs into the US. So in 10 years after the financial crisis, they created 22 million jobs. Just in the recent past, just in this year, they will shed 37 million jobs. So in 10 years, they've created 22 million. Because of COVID, they will shed 37 million jobs. It's the highest unemployment that the US has ever seen, and that's the largest economy, or one of the largest economies in the world. So that's the first stop. The second stop is the fact that South Africa was in a very difficult position economically before COVID. So because of a lot of things that happened politically and otherwise, our manufacturing industries, our construction industries came to an almost halt. Because of the drought that we experienced for such a long time, the agricultural industry was also in a difficult position. So even before COVID, we had a second stop of the anemic economic growth in South Africa as it stood. And then came the third stop, and the third stop was COVID. Now, the impact of COVID on South Africa is immense. So we think we're looking at probably a 10% contraction to our economy in 2020. Now, the last time that we had anything that is close to minus 10% was just subsequent to the Second World War. And the good thing about after the Second World War is there was a lot of people were employed after the Second World War. Where in South Africa, going into COVID, we have 29.1% unemployment and youth unemployment of 55.2%. So the next graph, slightly small on the top right there, is just what unemployment or the change of employment could look like in all the industries. And right on the right-hand side, you'll see a total there. That the best case scenario is that South Africa in 2020, as a result of COVID, this third stop, will lose close to 800,000 jobs, or close on 1.8 million jobs if the worst case scenario pans out. And just 1.8 million jobs loss is in the context of about 16.5 million people that have jobs in South Africa. So that's a massive knock. So that's the context that we are working in. And then what I realized just with so many people that I'm speaking with around their personal finances is that our personal finances also have experienced 3 stops. Now, I have spent a lot of time with students and their finances, and a lot of students that study finance. And I've spent over the past few months an enormous amount of time with students. So when I put this slide up with some of the students, they reminded me of this old adage of what the difference is between a normal student and a drunk student, and a student that is high that happened onto a stop street in the middle of the night. And then they told me that there is no such thing as a normal student, so there's no such person. And then that a drunk student runs the stoplight, but a student that is high on something waits until the stop sign turns green, and then they proceed. So the 3 stops that we are experiencing is not normal for anybody. It's not a stop sign that we can run, any of us, and it's also not a stop sign that you can sit and wait for better days. So what I'm seeing with people's finances is that even before COVID, people's finances were in real difficulty. But the way that we dealt with it, many people, was that their income was less than their expenses. And in order to keep the same living standard, what they did was they incurred debt, whether it's credit card debt or top up on, house debt, or bought a car on debt. So a difficult scenario in a South Africa that wasn't growing. People tried to keep their living standards going by augmenting their income with debt. And now this third stop is coming, where COVID has come to us, and all of a sudden now we might not have enough income to pay our expenses. And also now we've got debt, and maybe we don't have enough income to pay our interest on our debt, never mind our equity that we have to repay on our debt. And now you in a situation where the worst thing that we can do now, and I see this with a lot of young professionals, is they were in a difficult position. They tried to keep their living standard going by borrowing. Now they can't even repay their borrowings. And what many young people are now doing is they're going, with all good intentions of their parents, they're going and they're borrowing money from their parents. Or they do the smart thing and they say, no, I'm going to consolidate my debt. Consolidate debt is just debt in one place as opposed to many. So the consolidation of debt, or going to our parents to go and get loans at no interest, in my opinion, just extends the inevitable decision that we have to take of taking responsibility for our lives. So then the question is, if you are in this picture, or you businesses in this picture, or you have kids that are in this picture, 3 stops that have hit their finances, the question is, what now? Now, the answer to that question is there's 2 ways that you can go. The first way that you can go is you can blame shift. So you can blame, China. You can blame COVID. You can blame Donald Trump. Although a lot of things that go wrong in the world, I do blame on Donald Trump. Even the mullet is coming back because of this guy. So I mean, it's a really strange environment that we are working in. But I mean, so either you can blame and blame shift, or you can act. And in my opinion, this is a time, if ever there were a time in the history of the world to act, is now. Now, ACT is a bit of an acronym that I believe that we can hold on to. The A stands for it's time to pay attention. The C stands for pay attention to each and every cent that you earn and spend. And the T stands for the right theology that you do all these things in. So this is not a time to blame shift to parents, economies, governments, banks, or anybody. This is a time to act, to pay attention to each and every cent based on a very sound theological perspective. So let's just talk about paying attention quickly. So the best story that I can sort of share that explains how important it is to act in a different way that brought us as people and businesses to these 3 stops that I spoke about before is a Chinese saying that goes like this. It says, watching the trees to catch a hare. Now, a hare is a rabbit or a horse or a unungwaja. So it's one of these things that you try to catch and never do. So the story goes that there was a very poor region in China, and there was a famine in that region, and many people died as a result of this famine. But there was a family that was still alive, and this father went out into the forest to go and catch hare or rabbits, because those were the only things that were still alive during that time, because they couldn't be caught. And he walked into the forest, and as he walked into the forest, a rabbit jumped up because he got a fright, and it ran into a tree, killing itself. And the father thought this is like heaven. He picked up the rabbit, killed it, and they ate him and his 3 kids. 2 weeks later, him and his 3 kids passed away. And the reason why they passed away was, since that day, after he caught the rabbit in that surreal fashion, he went to the same spot, he sat behind the same tree, and he watched the tree to catch a hare. And I think that's a very important point for us, just to, if we go in the same way as we've dealt with our finances that maybe got us in a difficult position, this is a time where many things can go wrong. And I'm speaking from experience here. I mean, just our family, our savings. There was a time during this crisis where our savings fell by 30%. Our income for this year would probably be half of what it was last year. One of our businesses that we run is in the hospitality industry, and since March, there's zero income into that business, and we've got people that work there, and UIF claims, and so on and so forth. So I'm talking here not only from books but from experience. So the greatest book on finance is the Bible, and I want to share this verse with you. The verse is in 2 Corinthians 9:8. It says, God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. So when we go into a crisis, this is like the poster child verse in the Bible where we go to and say, okay, but even if there are 3 stops in South Africa, even if there are 3 stops in my personal finances, even if there are 5 stops, God is able to make all grace abound towards us. And the way that we read this is we say, God will look after me. And sometimes we even say, I don't have to act differently. I can just sit and watch trees to catch hare. And maybe when he's provided to me, then I will have sufficient to give to others. But if you really read this verse in the way that I think God intended this verse, is if you look at that word grace, when you look at the Greek version or the Greek translation of it, that grace means the means to provide for others. It's not a grace that needs to get me out of trouble that was maybe out of my own making, or maybe as a result of COVID, or maybe as a result of something else. That grace is a grace that says, I provide you with means to bless others. That grace will abound to us. And then the word that is used in our respect is this word sufficiency. And sufficiency is just a big word for enough. So God says, I will give grace so that you will have enough, not more than you need, not less than you need. You will have enough. And then the place where he uses that word abundance is not with respect to us. That abundance he uses in respect of others. The one thing that I've learned in this lockdown is I felt for a long time that I've lost my freedom. But halfway through this lockdown, I realized that in losing my freedom, I've gained freedom from things that I thought that I needed. the list of things that I thought that I needed was very long. And then in quiet time with God, I started asking God, what does your list look like for what I need? And where my list was this long, God's list was this long. And as we now talk about our sense, I think there's something that had to shift in my mind with respect to our personal finances and our businesses and the finances of our businesses around what is sufficient for me, what is enough for me. Because if I get that right, then there will be an abundance for the people that live around me, and there will be an abundance for South Africa to help us get through this very, very difficult situation. God's list of my needs is a lot shorter than my list. And when we get to sense now, this is where I think it's time to get practical. So I want to just suggest a few things that we've done in our own home, or things that we're suggesting to people, and that is just a very simple thing. There's a absolutely godly tool called Excel, a spreadsheet. Next to the Bible is probably the most godly instrument that we can use for our finances. But many times I speak with people and I ask, can you show me your budget? And then they bring together pieces of paper. This is a time to pay attention on a sound theological footing on the sense, and we do that through budgeting. So there's a great website, 227.com. It's a very user-friendly, very intuitive way to do your budget if you haven't done it before. So that's a good start. And then let's start talking about income. So when you start budgeting, when your income is less than your expenses, then you know that you have to act. So if you ever wondered whether you should act, if you're in a position where your income is less than your expenses, the answer is yes, now is the time to act. So how do you act? With respect to income, I want to make this point. If you have a job, hold on to that job for dear life. There's so many people that I speak with, and they say, no, the pressure is just so high and working from home is so difficult. And they think they need to give up their jobs in order to be there for their children, and all the difficulty that goes with that. In this type of environment, if you have a job, my only suggestion is hold on to that job as far as you can. Many people say, but I don't have data. I can't work from home because I don't have data, if people have that type of setup. And my suggestion to them is buy the biggest data bundle that you can get and make sure that you are productive and you are performing at your job. If, however, you are in a position where you have reduced income because of COVID, my suggestion is that you make sure that your employer claims from the TERS fund under the UIF. There's just so many businesses that didn't even do that for their employees. And my suggestion just to the employees is to make sure that their employers do that on their behalf. And the TERS payment, where there's a top-up payment for our loss of income, only applies until the end of July. And then after that, if you are employed and you have lost income, you have a right to go to the UIF and still claim for a top-up. The initial indication is that we will be able to do that until September of this year. Making sure that if you have income, protected. If you've lost income, see if the government safety net is available to you either through TERS or through the UIF system. And then what I also want to suggest is there's just so many people that in this environment, they've gone through those things, but it's possible to do a second job. I've spoken to individuals that now are tutoring young kids that are at school that are struggling because of their difficulty in online training. And people are making additional income because they are coming alongside young kids at school or at university and tutoring them for money on a Zoom basis or MS Team or Skype basis. So that's just an example where online tutoring in your area of expertise with students or with individuals at school can top up your income. Just think more broadly maybe about where and how can I top up my income. Then we get to expenses. So when we get to expenses, there's the difference between needs and wants. And what I've done is I've put down the difference between needs and wants. And with respect to wants, stuff like, DSTV is a want. It's something that one can stop. New clothes is a want. There's certain apps on my phone that I didn't need and I didn't use, that I took off, that I don't have to pay for anymore. Another plan could be to travel to work with people and save fuel money on that basis. Maybe going onto a cheaper cell phone contract. Maybe stopping buying stuff on one day only. We'll continue spending on one day only, and there will be no money left for a rainy day when there's just one day left. And then the other thing that probably people hold on to for very, very long is now that Uber Eats is operational again, the takeout food. There's just so much money that we spend and splurge on takeouts. So these are just examples of things that are really wants and they are not needs. And then you get to things that are needs. So housing is a need. Housing is a need. So if you are in a position where you can't pay for housing, go to the landlord, go to the bank, make sure that they allow you extensions. They're not allowed to put you out of your house. No person that rents a property to you or no bank can take you out of your property during lockdown. So make sure that you get extensions from them. Another thing that a lot of people are looking at is their medical aid schemes. Now, there are cheaper plans that one can go onto. But if you have an illness, if you have a serious illness, obviously that's not something to contemplate. But there are some of us that are of low risk. One thing that one can do during this year, if your medical aid allows it, interim periods, is to go onto a cheaper medical aid scheme. Short-term insurance is another one. Short-term insurance, there's certain things that you can maybe increase your voluntary excess on, things that are of lower risk. There's some cheaper insurance quotes that one can get. So there's a lot of activity in the insurance space, all things that we need. But if you're going to pay attention to cents, those are things that we can really, really focus on. Then I want to get to assets and liability. So this is budget, this is expenses and income. I'll get to savings in a moment. So with respect to money that we owe and things that we own, Benjamin Franklin had a great saying where he says, pay what you owe and you'll know what's your own. So there's many things that we buy that somebody else owes. And those would be like cars. So the biggest thing that I can suggest to people is to really think about the cars that we drive and the money that we pay towards cars. I mean, if you pay 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 Rand per month towards a car, and you go back to your budget and you say, listen, my budget doesn't work, but I go back to my car that I might own, and I say, okay, but if I sell that car and I drive something cheaper, then I will be able to save money. Then many people say, no, but I owe money on the car, so there's an amount that I would have to pay in. And many times that amount that we would have to pay in, there would be 6 months of that payment, and that you will be free of that debt. My suggestion always to people with respect to cars is, if you only buy a car if you can buy it cash. And then people say, okay, but that's impossible. Okay, so it is possible if you can save towards a car. And there are things like Uber that we can use. Many families are selling their one car and they drive their kids around with that, and the rest of it they Uber during lockdown. These things are absolutely possible. And if you have a lot of cash and you can buy big cars, my suggestion would be is buy the smallest car that your ego can handle. But cars is like it's a devastating thing when it comes to debt. Sell stuff that you don't use. Sell, if you have a boat, maybe sell it. If you have musical instruments that you haven't played in years, sell the stuff. And then the question around houses, I've chatted to so many people where they just said, listen, this is where we've raised our kids and we can't sell our house and so on. And then I speak with couples and their marriages are in absolute tatters, but they're holding on to this house, but they can't afford this house and their marriage is falling apart. And many couples have over the past few months come to the point where they said, okay, so it is possible in this market to sell a house for a period of time to rent something smaller so that we can sort out our finances so that we can act in order to be able to stand on our own 2 feet again. So that's on personal finances. It's a rush through how to focus on sense. The quickest way that I can maybe suggest business owners to think about their businesses, if you are in trouble with respect to your business, the first point that I just want to make is please consider not making the mistake mixing your personal finances with your business finances. The moment that we do that, we stop making judicious decisions with respect to our personal finances and our business finances. Those things can never be brought together because then we make suboptimal decisions. But if you are in trouble, there's this pro bono body that's been brought together. It's called Cobra. You can find them on cobra.org.za. And they are pro bono accountants, business rescue lawyers, business practitioners and consultants that have helped many companies in this country, small companies, medium companies, and large companies to get through this. They know all the legislation. They know what you can claim for. They know how to help you. They know how to put you in contact with people that can assist you in this area. And then I want to just maybe close with this scripture, again, 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8. And I just want to go from verse 8 to verse 10 as we close. And God is able, He is, to make all grace abound toward you, that you always having all sufficiency, having enough for yourself in all things, may have more than enough for others. As it is written, He has dispersed abroad, He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. Now may He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness. And this is my prayer for each and every person on this call or that will listen to this later, that in acting on the situation, on the 3 stops that you might have in your finances, that God will increase the fruits of your righteousness. Great. So now hopefully there's some questions or absolute disagreements that's waiting in the wings.
I have a question.
Go for it, Paula.
So I'm in a property that goes up annually with 10%, and it's costing me a fortune. I'm looking at another 10% increase in August. So I've been pondering this. Don't really want to move to a smaller place just to rent again, but to actually, I know I need to downscale to buy a property, and then at least next year my bond amount will still be the same, and the year after that still the same, instead of having these annual increases that a owner puts on your contract. Is now a good time to buy?
So is it a personal or a private dwelling, or is it a business location?
No, it would be private. Well, for personal use.
Okay. So 10% escalation is ginormous. It is just absolutely ginormous. So if there's a way that one can get out of such an escalation, either through renting somewhere else or buying, I think that would be a good step. It is definitely a buyer's market. So there's a lot of people that are struggling and a lot of properties that are going on sale. The interest rates are also quite low now. So if one were to buy, I think it's a good time with low interest rates. Some of the banks are allowing people also to fix the interest rates. In other words, not have a variable interest rate that increases as the repo rate increases over time. But the biggest suggestion here is I think the very wise statement that you made, and that is, even if I have to go smaller to pay less for my own property than to somebody else's property, and that's quite important, so that you don't pay more, and you don't subject yourself now to an increased rental on an annual basis. I think if that godly Excel tool makes sense, then I think it's a good market to do this in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. So I've got a couple of other questions here for Boshoff that people have sent in. That the house one was also one of the other ones that came in, just asking the question about, is it a good time to buy? So one of the other ones was, this person just says that UIF is totally unreachable, endless phone calls and emails, no response. Any suggestions on that, Boshoff?
So what we found is if individuals start phone in, it's really difficult. But if we have the business owners contact the UIF on the behalf of the individuals, and we do that in our business, we've done it by email, so it doesn't help phoning. So we send emails, and then those emails become hate mails later on. But that's the best way for us to gain traction. Individuals, it's exceptionally difficult because they're just so inundated. So if you are in employment of somebody, my suggestion would be ask the employer to do that through the email channels.
Great, thanks, Boshoff. So another question would be, what do you believe in terms of giving financially to others who are in need when you have debt of your own?
So my suggestion to people would be to sort out and take responsibility for our own lives with very clear principles of stewardship, and then having sufficient and abundant to give to others. So a lot of people just said, look, I'm going to give to other people because as I put bread onto the water, my problems will be solved miraculously. And again, I don't think that's what the scripture says. I believe scripture talks about looking after our own finances with solid stewardship, applying biblical principles to it, and then only lending money to people that do the same. So I had a person a long time ago that drove into my house with a big car, and he said, can you lend me money? And I said, why would I lend you money? And he said, no, I've got big trouble. And I said, well, you've got big trouble, but you've got a big car as well. Why don't you sell the car first and then, see if you can sort yourself out? And he said, no, my kids, their egos and their self-esteems won't make it if I sell this car. So I didn't lend the person money, and we're not friends anymore. But that's the principle that I think is good stewardship on own finances. First, before you lend, and then, if I can suggest, lend to people on the same biblical principles of stewardship.
So we've got two more. If you've got a quick question, you can throw it in before the time runs out. So this person wants to know whether UIF or TERS applies to deferred salary cuts.
That is a great question to which I don't have an answer. I apologize, I don't know. A good place to find that out would be on the Cobra website. So they've got a repository of all the legislation, and they've got a cute little bot that you can ask questions to. So that would be probably the quickest way to get an answer to that question.
Right. So last one then that we have in the bag at this point is just, Boshoff, do you believe in consolidating debt in this season?
If consolidating debt means to only worry about one number as opposed to many, but nothing change with respect to our spending habits, I think it's a problem. I spoke with people just in the past month that consolidated debt on things that they actually didn't need. So consolidating debt on cars that they didn't need and so on. So if I can suggest, do the hard work around needs and wants and budgeting first. Do the hard work around own and owe first. And once you've come to like a solid stewardship view of that, and it's just for a while until things are better, then what you are left with, I think debt consolidation could make sense because a lot of banks are trying to help people through that with lower interest rates on a consolidated basis. But my suggestion would just be, don't consolidate debt on things that you don't need. Go through the hard work first and then take the consolidation step. Then it is a good suggestion, I think.
Good stuff. Just want to honor Boshoff. I think it's very difficult to find people in life who will tell you the things that you don't want to hear, even when you have to hear them, but do it in a way that is still loving, and I think just speaks of biblical wisdom. So can we just appreciate Boshoff just taking time tonight to bless us? Thank you so much, guys. For Blada as well, your family's just a huge blessing, and trusting that we will see fruit just coming from this. I think knowledge will stay that and not become wisdom if we don't apply what we've heard tonight. Brilliant stuff. Guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And once again, thank you to Boshoff and Blada. Bye, everyone.